Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. A routine Tuesday morning, a phone call, an unexpected inheritance. But when Jason arrives, he finds a luxury suburb built on his land without permission. What follows is a battle of truth versus deception, one man versus a powerful HOA, and a secret too big to stay buried. I did not expect the phone call to change anything about my life. It came on a Tuesday morning while I was standing in traffic on South Congress, coffee cooling in the cup holder, mentally preparing for a day of boundary surveys and client arguments that would all blur together by sunset. The attorney's voice was calm, almost bored, which should have been my first clue that something absurd was about to follow. My Uncle Harold had passed away. No spouse, no children. I was named the sole heir. 1,000 acres in Bastrop County. I remember actually laughing out loud in my truck, because Uncle Harold was a hermit by choice and a mystery by profession. He hated cities, distrusted banks, and believed paperwork was a form of psychological warfare. 1,000 acres sounded like an exaggeration, the kind lawyers use before adding the word subject to review. I told myself it was probably scrubland, trees, maybe a seasonal creek. Useful, sure, but nothing that would flip my life upside down. I told the attorney I'd come by later in the week and thought no more about it. The documents arrived 2 days later. Deeds, surveys, plats going back decades. Clean chain of title. No liens, no easements, no shared access rights. As someone who worked in land development and surveying, I knew how rare that was. It was almost suspiciously perfect. I skimmed the legal descriptions, nodded to myself, and filed the folder away. I didn't even bother looking at satellite images. That was my first mistake. The following weekend, curiosity finally got the better of me. I drove out to Bastrop County early Saturday morning, expecting dirt roads and silence. Instead, the silence vanished about 5 minutes after I turned off the highway. Neatly trimmed lawns appeared, decorative stone signage, a guarded entrance with wrought iron gates, and a tasteful wooden sign that read, Willow Park Heights. I slowed down, convinced I had taken a wrong turn, until my GPS chirped that I had arrived. I sat there for a full minute, engine idling, staring at the entrance of a wealthy suburban development sitting exactly where my land was supposed to be. Not adjacent to it, not near it, on it. I drove through anyway, past houses that cost more than my entire net worth, past manicured parks, private roads, a pool complex with palm trees that had definitely not grown there naturally. Everything about the place screamed permanence. This was not some temporary mistake. This was a community that believed it owned the ground under its feet. I parked near a walking trail and stepped out, boots on asphalt that, according to my paperwork, belonged to me. I felt a strange mix of disbelief and professional irritation. If this was a boundary error, it was the most expensive one I had ever seen. I took photos. I checked coordinates. I checked them again. Every time, the same result. Half of Willow Park Heights sat squarely inside the legal description of my inherited land. On Monday morning, I went straight to the county land records office. No drama, no accusations. I simply asked questions. The clerk pulled up the parcel history, frowned, and then frowned harder. After an hour and 2 supervisors, the picture finally emerged. Years earlier, the developer of Willow Park Heights had not purchased the land. They had leased it through a third-party holding company. A shell. That company had stopped filing reports and vanished 2 years ago. The lease had expired. No renewal. No purchase, no recorded easements, nothing. I asked the question I already knew the answer to. Who owned the land now? The clerk slid the screen toward me and pointed. My name. I left the building with a knot in my stomach and a headache behind my eyes. I was not excited. I was alarmed. I did not want a war with hundreds of homeowners, but legally, unmistakably, the land was mine. Roads, park, pool, guardhouse, and several structures included. They were living on borrowed time, and no one had bothered to tell them the clock was ticking. That afternoon, I sent a formal letter to the Willow Park Heights Homeowners Association, polite, professional, requesting contact to discuss ownership clarification and next steps. I sent it certified. I waited. Days passed. No response, no call, no email. That silence told me more than any reply could have. Whatever this was, it was not an innocent oversight, so I decided to stop writing letters and start showing up. I pulled up to the Willow Park Heights HOA office on a Thursday morning, early enough that the air still held some of that Central Texas cool before the sun got mean. The building was nicer than I expected. Faux stone facade, tall windows, well-watered landscaping that smelled like money and HOA dues. There was a small plaque near the door. Community matters begin here. The irony didn't hit me until later. Inside, the receptionist looked like she'd rather be dead than processing walk-ins. I introduced myself and asked, as casually as I could manage, if any board members were available for a short discussion regarding land ownership. I was halfway through explaining who I was when she stopped me with a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "They're in a meeting. You can leave a message." I gave her my name, my number, and a short explanation. Then I added, almost as an afterthought, "I'll wait." It didn't take long. After about 15 minutes of awkward silence, 3 people emerged from a side room. Leading the group was a woman in her 50s with stiff blonde hair, a rigid spine, and the kind of smile that people mistake for politeness, but is really a weapon. She had a clipboard tucked under her arm like it was a sword. "Jason Lewis," she asked, and when I nodded, she gave a tight smile. "I'm Karen Winters, president of the board. These are George Melton and Cassie Parks." George was the kind of man who looked like he collected golf shirts more seriously than any hobby should allow. Cassie barely made eye contact, but clutched a tablet like it was a life raft. I shook hands. I introduced myself again. I explained the situation with as much clarity and courtesy as I could muster. Inherited land, clear title, expired lease agreements, and the legal fact that nearly half their community currently sat on my property. I offered copies of the documents, notarized, filed with the county, transparent as sunlight. Karen didn't even glance at them. "Mr. Lewis," she said, slowly and deliberately, "this is ridiculous." I blinked. "Excuse me." She stepped closer, shoulders squared, voice rising slightly. "This neighborhood was built over 10 years ago. We maintain it. We pay taxes. We have rules and bylaws. You showing up with some papers and wild claims doesn't mean anything. Frankly, this feels like harassment. Or worse, some sort of scam." I kept my voice even. "The documents are real. The county confirms it. I'm not here to cause problems. I'm here to resolve them before attorneys have to be involved." George scoffed, crossing his arms. "Convenient timing. Property values have gone up. Now you come knocking. Looking for a payout?" "I'm not looking for a payout," I said. "I'm looking for a conversation." Karen smiled. It was a cold, practiced thing. "Well, I'm going to stop you right there. If you show up here again without a lawyer, I will call the police. And if you try to contact any residents directly, I'll consider it harassment and file a restraining order." "That's not how this works," I said, still trying to keep my tone level. "You're operating on land you don't own. That's not an opinion. That's a fact. And I'm telling you to leave this building," she snapped. Then she turned to the receptionist and said, without looking at me, "Call security." 2 minutes later, I was standing outside the front door, the sun finally burning through the clouds and starting to cook the sidewalk. I had recorded the entire interaction, not to escalate, just to protect myself. I'd suspected pushback. I hadn't expected the sheer level of delusion. The way Karen spoke, you'd think they'd built Rome, not a McMansion suburb in the middle of pine country. The fact that they didn't own the land didn't seem to register, or worse, they knew and were gambling. I wouldn't have the guts to follow through. That night, I typed up an official follow-up letter, attached the same documents, and sent it via certified mail, this time also copying my attorney. I kept it polite, professional, but firm. The next morning, a county inspector showed up on my gate. Claimed there had been a complaint about unauthorized grading work and possible disturbances to community land. Community land. I almost laughed in his face. Instead, I showed him my paperwork and explained the situation. He took notes, made a few calls, and left awkwardly, clearly realizing he'd walked into something more complicated than a landscaping violation. 2 days later, another inspector came, this time zoning enforcement, then a code compliance officer. The pattern was clear. I'd poked the queen bee, and now the hive was testing its stingers. I knew exactly where this was going. The only question was how far they were willing to take it. The lawsuit arrived by courier, thick enough to qualify as a small weapon. I remember the weight of it in my hands more than the contents, because weight implies confidence. Whoever sent this believed they were right, or at least believed they could scare me into backing down. Willow Park Heights Homeowners Association versus Jason Lewis. Declaratory judgment. Quiet title action. Allegations that my documents were forged, my claims fraudulent, my presence disruptive and malicious. I didn't panic. I got annoyed. I called my attorney before I even finished the first page. He listened quietly, then let out a low whistle. "They're swinging hard," he said, which usually means they're scared. We didn't respond emotionally, we responded surgically. I hired an independent surveying firm that I'd worked with before, people who double-checked their own math because they didn't trust anyone, including themselves. We pulled historical plats, satellite imagery, original subdivision filings, and county GIS data going back decades. We overlaid everything, every fence line, every road, every drainage easement, inch by inch. What came back was worse than I expected. The HOA's official cadastral map did not just contain errors. It had been altered. Boundaries were shifted subtly, but deliberately. Shaved here, expanded there, always in Willow Park Heights' favor. The supposed purchase documents they cited traced back to a holding company that had been dissolved 6 years earlier. Not inactive, dissolved, no legal standing, no authority to convey anything. In other words, their entire claim rested on paper ghosts. We filed our response with exhibits that spoke louder than arguments. The judge scheduled an early hearing on their request for a temporary injunction, which they wanted to use to freeze my ability to act while the case dragged on. Their attorney tried to sound confident. Mine didn't raise his voice at all. The injunction was denied. No freezing, no shortcuts. That was the moment the gloves came off. Within days, my name started appearing in places I didn't put it. Local forums, neighborhood Facebook groups, anonymous posts accusing me of trying to extort families and destroy a community. Someone leaked my business address online. One morning, I walked out to find my truck tire mysteriously flat, nails scattered nearby like punctuation. I reported it. Nothing happened. Then came the calls. Unknown numbers, heavy breathing, one voicemail that just said, "You don't belong here," before cutting off. I didn't scare easily, but I'd be lying if I said I slept well that week. I installed cameras, documented everything. If this was going to get ugly, I wanted a paper trail so long it tripped people. The HOA escalated again, filing complaints with the city claiming I was interfering with private infrastructure and inciting unrest. Private. That word kept showing up like a bad joke. The irony was so thick it almost deserved its own zoning designation. I went back to the county offices, not angry this time, just thorough. I wanted every record, every filing, every correspondence related to Willow Park Heights. I could feel it in my gut. This wasn't incompetence. This was construction built on denial, maintained by intimidation. They thought I'd fold. They thought pressure would do what facts could not. They were wrong. The documents came in a manila envelope, unmarked, slid under the door of my office after hours. I thought it was junk at first, some paranoid neighbor's collection of conspiracy theories, but inside were copies of HOA board meeting minutes, scanned emails, and an old USB stick with a yellow Post-it note stuck to it. On the note, "You were right. She knew." G. I didn't know who G was yet, but I plugged in the drive anyway, ignoring every IT policy I've ever followed in my life. It was worth it. The recordings were real. The first was a video clip, low res, like it was recorded on a laptop from across the room. A HOA meeting, dated 5 years ago. Karen was there, at the head of the table, hair the same weaponized shade of blonde, voice unmistakable. She was speaking to a handful of board members, including George and Cassie, the same ones who'd tried to dress me down in the office weeks earlier. On the video, Karen said, clearly and without hesitation, the lease has expired. The holding company ghosted. If this ever goes public, we lose everything. No one wants to find out their $1 million home sits on borrowed dirt, so we act like it's fine. We don't acknowledge anything. We keep the HOA running and keep people paying dues. That's what keeps them obedient. One of the board members asked nervously, "What if someone finds the original deeds?" Karen didn't even flinch. Then we bury it in legal shit until they choke on the paperwork. I sat there in the dark, jaw tight, staring at the screen. There was no spin left, no gray area. They knew. They had known for years. And they had decided deliberately to lie, to cover it up, and to weaponize ignorance. It all clicked. The lawsuit, the character smears, the fake inspections, the inflated sense of righteousness Karen wielded like a badge. This wasn't pride or misunderstanding. It was fraud. My phone buzzed. A blocked number. Against better judgment, I answered. Jason? The voice was tired, older. This is Graham Hall. I was the HOA's legal consultant from 2013 to 2020. I'm the one who left the documents. I didn't say anything. He kept going. I helped cover for her. She said it was temporary, that they'd figure out a legal workaround. Then it got deeper, and I got scared. But I kept everything, just in case. I can't undo what I did, but I don't want to go down with her. I'll testify, if it comes to that. I met him the next day at a diner in Bastrop. Graham looked like guilt with a tie on, weathered gray, like he hadn't slept well in years. He handed me 2 folders and a flash drive, and then he just sat there, stirring cold coffee. She offered a developer the parkland, he said, not looking up. Tried to get them to build townhomes on the remaining open space, to create quick cash flow. Said she'd use the money to buy a new parcel and pretend it had always been theirs. It fell through. Who else knew, I asked. Just her and George. Cassie suspected, but she stayed quiet. Honestly, they're scared of her. We all were. I didn't pity him, but I respected the attempt at redemption. Back at my office, I went through the files. Internal memos, legal drafts, informal admissions that Willow Park Heights had no recorded easements, no purchase agreements, and no rights to enforce community rules on property they didn't own. There was even a letter Karen wrote but never sent to the board of directors of a local developer called High Rock Development. It proposed a backdoor deal. In exchange for a donation to the HOA, she'd hand over exclusive access to future rezoning plans and shared infrastructure. Translation: bribe us and we'll help you seize land we don't own. I didn't go public immediately. First, I verified everything with my lawyer. Then we prepared a packet, notarized transcripts, the video, the unsigned deal letter, the emails. I sent it to 3 local news outlets. I also sent a sealed version to the county prosecutor. Then I waited. 2 days later, the first article dropped. HOA president suppressed land ownership risk for years. Secret recordings reveal. The video clip went viral in the local Facebook mom groups within hours. Comments ranged from "I knew something was shady" to "Is my mortgage even real?" and "Karen needs to rot in jail." The next morning, a second article hit. Whistleblower claims HOA leader sought secret deal with developer. It included excerpts of the unsent letter, which I had shared under condition of anonymity for Graham's safety. The HOA was officially radioactive. Karen tried to hold a community trust forum that weekend, basically a PR stunt dressed up as a town hall. She made the mistake of live streaming it. Halfway through her monologue about misinformation and out-of-context recordings, someone in the audience shouted, "Play the rest of the tape." Then another voice added, "Is it true you offered our land to a builder?" She froze. You could see it. That split second of realization that her grip had slipped. The HOA board meeting the next day was canceled due to security concerns. The police increased patrols, not for me, but to protect her from her own neighbors. My lawyer advised caution. He was right, but the tide had turned, and it wasn't turning back. Residents who'd ignored me were now sending messages, asking for documents, wanting to understand if they could buy the land under their homes, or worse, if they were squatting without knowing it. Karen hadn't just underestimated me, she'd underestimated the power of truth when it finally breaks the surface. I didn't sleep much the night before the letters went out. Not because I was nervous, they weren't threats. And I wasn't out for revenge. I just knew the moment those envelopes landed in a few hundred mailboxes, there'd be no turning back. Each homeowner in Willow Park Heights received a hand-delivered certified letter that began with the same sentence: "Your home currently stands on privately owned land, and that land belongs to me." Inside were 3 options. 1. Purchase the parcel beneath their home at a fair, below-market price. 2. Sign a long-term lease agreement that guaranteed usage rights and stability for 25 years, renewable. 3. Vacate the property within 6 months and return the land. I also set up a hotline and a legal support team, pro bono consultations for residents to understand their position, their risks, their rights. I wasn't playing hardball for the sake of it, but I wasn't going to be quiet while a fraudulent HOA pretended none of this was happening. The first calls came in within hours. Confused, panicked, some angry, some just numb. One woman cried on the line, not because she was furious, but because she felt betrayed. They promised us everything was handled. We paid every damn HOA fee they asked for. They said it was secure. By that evening, the Willow Park Heights community Facebook page turned into a war zone. Karen tried to post a calming statement, blaming a land dispute initiated by an outside party with questionable motives. But people weren't buying it anymore. Screenshots of her past posts contradicted her statements. Residents started asking real questions. Why didn't we know about the expired lease? Where did our dues really go? How long have they lied to us? Then someone leaked one of the videos of Karen's meeting with the board, the one where she talked about burying the truth in legal shit. It exploded. Parents, retirees, young professionals all realized in one crushing wave that their HOA wasn't just incompetent. It had operated as a cult of denial. That weekend, I held an open Q&A at the local library. Over 70 people showed up, standing room only. I came with documents, maps, copies of every recorded deed. I didn't spin it. I told them the truth. I wasn't here to evict families. I wasn't a developer. I wasn't trying to make a quick buck. I was a landowner stuck with a mess that someone else had buried, and I was giving them a fair path forward. One man, tall, gray beard, arms crossed, finally stood up and asked the question everyone else was thinking. What happens if we just refuse to do anything? If we pretend none of this is happening? I didn't smile when I answered. Then this turns into a legal eviction process. For all of you. And I don't want that. The room went silent. No shouting. Just reality settling into the walls. After the meeting, a few residents approached me quietly. Cassie Parks, the HOA treasurer, was among them. She looked 10 years older than the last time I saw her. She's panicking, Cassie whispered. Karen's trying to push through emergency motions to transfer funds, possibly dissolve the HOA assets and reroute them elsewhere. She's meeting someone next week, a developer. I blinked. High Rock. Cassie nodded. She wants to sell the parkland, your land, before everything implodes. This was desperation. I called Graham. He checked his old contacts, confirmed the meeting. Karen was trying to fast-track a deal with High Rock Development, sell off pieces of what she didn't own in exchange for hush money and legal defense cash. Classic scorched earth move. Take the money and leave everyone else in the fire. I reached out to a journalist I trusted, passed along Cassie's account and documentation Graham had provided weeks earlier. I told them to wait. We needed confirmation. I had an idea. Using information from Cassie and Graham, I had a friend pose as a junior associate from High Rock and arrange a casual meeting with Karen under the guise of being an intermediary for their legal team. She bit, showed up at a neutral site, talked openly, offered documents. We recorded everything. Then we made it public. The video hit the news on Tuesday. HOA president caught in secret deal to sell public parkland for private profit. The backlash was instant and nuclear. The next board meeting turned into a mutiny. Residents stood up, demanded Karen's resignation. She tried to shout them down. Someone filmed it. She screamed, "I did this to protect you." Someone else shouted back, "You did this to protect your own ass." By Friday, over 30 homeowners had formally submitted resignation letters from the HOA. Another group had filed for a temporary injunction to freeze all board activity. An emergency town vote was called. The board was collapsing, and yet Karen still acted like she had control. That weekend, I received a notice on my gate, code violation for unauthorized signage. The sign in question, a laminated map showing which homes sat on my land, stapled to a post near the community entrance. Apparently, telling the truth violated HOA aesthetics. The arrest didn't come immediately. That's the thing about white-collar crimes. Unless you're caught stuffing stacks of bills into a gym bag on camera, they take their sweet time. But pressure, that showed up fast. Within days of the leaked footage of Karen's secret negotiation with High Rock Development, the county district attorney opened an investigation. Local news trucks started camping near Willow Park Heights like it was a crime scene. The HOA office was bombarded with reporters and process servers. Karen stopped showing up altogether. Residents filed an emergency motion with the county civil court, demanding a freeze on all HOA accounts. Their argument: the board could no longer be trusted to manage communal funds in good faith. The judge didn't even blink, granted the injunction on the spot. HOA money was locked, assets frozen, and every board member subpoenaed to produce internal communications. It was open war now. Karen's lawyer made a statement on her behalf, denying all wrongdoing and claiming the videos were selectively edited. No one bought it, especially not after my attorney released the full, unedited footage to the court. Karen naming prices, offering soft access to parcels she didn't own, and describing her residence as too dumb to know what's real estate and what's just dirt. Was the real Karen. Unfiltered, the judge ordered a full evidentiary hearing. Karen predictably didn't show, but George and Cassie did, both looking like ghosts of their former HOA selves. Cassie, to her credit, admitted under oath that she had become deeply uncomfortable with the way Karen handled land matters. George tried to play dumb, which went poorly once the prosecution introduced emails showing him approving budget allocations for external legal silencing efforts. By this point, over 70 homeowners had signed onto a civil lawsuit against their own HOA, citing negligence, misrepresentation, and financial harm. Several residents hired their own legal teams, and one particularly tenacious retiree filed a complaint directly with the state attorney general's office. Then came the real gut punch for Karen. Investigators found a series of wire transfers tied to HOA accounts. Large sums, tens of thousands of dollars, sent to what looked like a consulting firm in Dallas. Except the firm didn't exist. It was a shell company, registered under a P.O. box, owned by an entity traced back to Karen's cousin. She had been funneling HOA money into a fake business to cover legal bills and, allegedly, private expenses. Now, it wasn't just civil. It was criminal. I watched it unfold from the sidelines, not with glee, but with a grim sense of inevitability. I had started all this trying to correct a legal error. Now I was watching an empire of suburban fraud collapse under its own hubris. I kept working. While Karen played fugitive CEO, I sat down with residents in small groups, explaining deeds, answering questions, offering them legitimate paths forward. I wasn't the enemy anymore. I was their only way out. Then the subpoena hit my inbox. Karen's lawyer had listed me as a hostile actor engaged in tortious interference. My attorney laughed so hard I thought he'd choke. Desperation is a hell of a legal strategy, he muttered. We filed a counterclaim. Defamation, malicious prosecution, abuse of process. And then, just when I thought it couldn't get any wilder, the police raided the HOA office. They seized hard drives, server backups, even physical files. According to the search warrant, they were looking for evidence of financial misconduct, bribery, document falsification, and obstruction of justice. The next day, the story broke statewide. HOA president accused of embezzlement and fraud in Bastrop County land scandal. Karen finally surfaced, not in person, but via a bizarre recorded video uploaded to her personal website. In it, she claimed she was being targeted by anarchists, accused me of weaponizing bureaucracy, and promised she would return stronger with legal vengeance. She looked tired, disheveled, like someone who'd been sleeping in a Holiday Inn and drinking wine from the minibar. The comments on the video were brutal. Even the residents who had once supported her now openly mocked her. One comment read, "You lied, you stole, and now you're crying about fairness. You ran this place like a dictator with a manicure." Then came the grand jury. 12 charges: fraud, misuse of public funds, falsifying legal documents, attempted bribery, wire fraud, obstruction, conspiracy. The list went on. The district attorney held a press conference. I stayed home. The residents, though, they gathered in the HOA's now empty meeting room, watching the live stream on a projector. When the indictment was read, there was actual applause. The woman who'd ruled with iron bylaws and pastel blouses was finally, officially finished. She was arrested without incident 3 days later. Cassie resigned the same afternoon. George went silent. And Willow Park Heights. For the first time since its founding, it had no HOA leadership, just families, neighbors, and one very exhausted landowner named Jason Lewis trying to clean up the wreckage of a 10-year lie. They took her in just after sunrise. It wasn't a dramatic arrest. No sirens, no chopper overhead, no slow-motion chase down a cul-de-sac. Just 2 unmarked SUVs pulling up to a rented townhome 20 miles from the neighborhood she once ruled like a petty monarch. Karen Winters opened the door in a bathrobe and was escorted out in handcuffs, head down, sunglasses on. If she said anything, the cameras didn't catch it. By noon, the footage was everywhere. Local news, social media, even on a satirical Instagram account that posted HOA horror stories. The caption read, "Karen, meet Karma." Karma, this is Karen. The official charges were read at the arraignment later that day. 12 counts, including fraud, embezzlement, document falsification, attempted bribery, wire fraud, and criminal conspiracy. She pled not guilty, of course. Her new attorney, some slick defense guy from Houston with a perfect smile and zero soul, claimed she was a victim of internal sabotage and that I was part of an orchestrated land grab. It didn't stick. By then, the evidence was overwhelming. The bribe attempt with High Rock was on video. The wire transfers to the shell company were confirmed. Emails and board minutes showed years of coordinated cover-ups. Testimony from Cassie, George, and Graham painted a damning picture of willful deceit, and all of it pointed to Karen at the center, authoritarian, obsessed with control, and willing to burn down a neighborhood to save her ego. The judge denied bail. From that moment, the rest unraveled fast. The HOA was effectively headless. A temporary court-appointed trustee was put in place, not to run the neighborhood, but to dismantle what was left of its legal structure. The accounts remained frozen. Vendors canceled their contracts. Maintenance crews stopped showing up. The once pristine Willow Park Heights began to look normal. Lawns grew a little longer. Christmas lights stayed up past January. No fines, no citations. Just people slowly realizing they didn't need a regime to be a community. I started getting calls from residents daily. Some angry, some embarrassed, most just confused. What happens now? Can we stay? Do we still owe dues? I gave them all the same answer. You live on my land, but I'm not your enemy. I'm offering a path forward, one house at a time. I met with dozens of families. Some cried, some apologized. A few still tried to argue with me. Decades of HOA conditioning don't disappear overnight, but most were relieved. The cloud was lifting. What had started as a land dispute had transformed into a moral reckoning. I filed paperwork with the county to begin individual sales of the land beneath each home. Prices were set low, intentionally. I didn't want to profit off their misery. I wanted to fix what Karen broke. Residents could buy outright or enter long-term lease-to-own agreements with no interest and full legal support. Every deal was recorded, transparent, and fair. Within a month, more than half of the community had signed. By the end of the quarter, that number had jumped to over 80%. The HOA was formally dissolved by court order 2 weeks later. Its remaining assets, what little hadn't vanished into Karen's corruption, were distributed to the residents on a per-household basis. The total wasn't much, but symbolically, it mattered. The regime was dead, and the people had reclaimed their autonomy. Graham Hall came by one afternoon during all this, unshaven, carrying a cheap bottle of wine as a sort of apology offering. Didn't think it would go this far, he muttered. I shrugged. Neither did I. He sat down on my porch and stared out at the rows of houses that once feared him, then feared me, and now just existed. You're not going to build condos, are you? He asked. Not here, I said. They've had enough concrete for one lifetime. I kept 400 acres untouched. I had plans, not for profit, but for peace. Nature trails, a public garden, a space without gates, without badges, without bylaws. Something real. Something un-Karen. The press dubbed the whole thing the HOA implosion of Bastrop. I was painted as everything from a legal avenger to a chaos agent. One magazine called me the man who broke the suburb. But I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like a guy who inherited a ticking time bomb and had the misfortune of actually reading the fine print. The last email I received from Karen came a week before her trial. Just one line. You think you won, but you ruined everything. I didn't reply. By the time the trial started, I barely recognized Willow Park Heights. The guardhouse was gone. The metal gates removed and donated for scrap. No more parking patrols. No more pink violation slips for trash cans left out an hour too long. No more whispered threats about non-compliant lawn decor. The place felt quieter, not in a dead way, in a healing way. Karen's trial was open to the public, but I only attended one day, the opening. I sat in the back, in a wooden bench surrounded by people who used to glare at me across picket fences. Now they nodded at me with quiet respect. The prosecution laid it all out like a morality play. False documents, manipulated maps, embezzled funds, betrayal of trust. They played the recordings. They showed the wire transfers. They put Graham and Cassie on the stand. George testified too in exchange for immunity, his face pale and sweaty, as he admitted he'd signed things he didn't understand. Karen sat at the defense table like a statue. No expression, no apology. Just a woman watching the final scene of her own downfall. She was found guilty on 11 counts, sentenced to 12 years, eligible for parole in 6. Her mugshot made the rounds. They say she cried in the holding cell. I wouldn't know. I didn't look. That same week, I filed the last deed transfer. Every home that wanted it now legally sat on ground they owned, or leased with full legal protection. The fear was gone. The uncertainty had been absorbed into new paperwork, clean and properly recorded, like it should have been all along. The old HOA building was converted into a community center. Residents painted over the logo and replaced it with a mural of a single tree growing between 2 lots, with the words "No More Secrets." I spent most of my time now walking the untouched 400 acres. No plans to sell, no meetings, just open land. I'd started building walking trails. Sometimes kids from the neighborhood came to help, shovels in hand, shoes muddy, laughing in ways they probably hadn't before. I liked that. One afternoon, I was trimming overgrowth near the creek bed when a teenager from the neighborhood came by. He looked a little nervous. "You're the guy who owned everything, right?" he asked. "Still do. Technically," I said. He nodded, then looked out at the trees. "This place is cool. I didn't know land could be, like, quiet." I smiled. "That's what happens when you take out the noise." He thought about that for a second, then asked, "What are you going to call it?" I hadn't decided yet, but something came to mind. Simple. Honest. "Boundary Park." He grinned. "That's kind of perfect." I didn't correct him. It was.